So we're gonna start inserting the freeze plugs and oil galley plugs here on the Jeep project. So this is gonna go into a 97 Jeep Cherokee. It's a 4-liter Chrysler engine here that we have bored 30 over. And it's gonna be roughly 4.6, 4.7 stroker. So it'll be a super fun build. So first thing I like to do is just take some fine grit sandpaper, 400, 600, something like that, and I'll run this just to make sure there's no nicks. Next thing that we're gonna do, take some brake cleaner, spray it onto a blue shop towel or what have you, and we're gonna clean those off. So the next thing I like to do before installing these, I just like to check, make sure that there's no nicks, no issues before tapping it in. This one looks good. This is a 2-inch freeze plug, and what I'm using is I'm driving it flush with this 63 millimeter just a bearing driver or race driver. I'll be able to even that back out with just a smaller race. Okay guys, we are we're gonna be doing our main checks when you're kind of reassembling a motor. There's some things that you just can't skip, and that is bearing clearances. So with bearing clearances in mind, we are going to be starting with our main journals here where the crankshaft sits. So you have 7 main journals. Number 3, this one has your thrust adjustment, and then so rear of the motor, front of the motor. These are already numbered from the factory. The only thing that I like to do is put a little mark on the front of each one indicating that it's pointed towards the front. We're gonna do, I already checked the actual diameters of the crank without the bearings, and those checked out. So we need to install our bearings dry, so with no lubrication or of anything. And what you'll see is on the caps or the bottom there is a tang. You'll see it right there. So you'll see that the tang on this groove is going to be off to the left, and that will show you which set of bearings that you need to use, because there is a top and a bottom. Of your crank journal caps out of the way, we'll go ahead and lay these in dry. So you'll want to make sure that you're extremely clean when it comes to your crank journals, because pretty much any type of like particles or anything down there will adjust the actual, will change the actual clearances. So we want to make sure everything's as clean as possible. Another thing to check is going to be that your oil holes line up. So as you see, there's a little slit. Okay. So once you have these properly seated, all the caps, and they're in the right orientation, I have these bolts just snug down for now. And then you're going to torque these to spec. So you're going to do around 30 foot-pounds, 70, and then 80. We're gonna measure our crank journal diameters. This is in preparation to place the crankshaft into the engine with our bearings in, and attempt to get an accurate bearing clearance. The 2 tools you're gonna need is you're gonna need a dial bore gauge, which is gonna be there on the left above the crankshaft, and then you need a 2 to 3 inch micrometer. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking the measurement of our journals zeroing our dial bore gauge, and then we'll go back to the cylinder block with all the journal caps on, and we're gonna see what the difference is between those two are. So essentially the diameter of the rod caps with the bearings in, we'll subtract the journal diameter from that, and that will give us our bearing clearance. Brand new stroker crank, realistically, they should be at 2.5 inches. But it's always good to double check with the mic and just see. It's good practice too, because it takes a little bit of a feel. Got my little buddy hanging out today. Little Jack will be the youngest person to rebuild the inline 6. 3 months old. So we'll get started here. Okay, so this is again the 2 to 3 inch micrometer, accurate up to 10 thousandths of an inch here. And again, it's a feel on these, so you really gotta make sure. Well, one, you gotta make sure they're zeroed. Jack's making some noise over there. And it just takes a little bit of practice. So measuring on the micrometer here, we're at 2.5 per, like right on the money. 2.50. So I mean, it looks like the machining on these are pretty good. So one of the unfortunate things about not having all the professional tools is that my dial bore gauge is relatively short. Some guys have these dial bore gauges that run all the way down, so unfortunately I'm gonna have to pop a cap off. To get some of these measurements as I'm kind of working down the block. Okay, so I have the dial bore gauge installed into the second journal here. And so I'm rocking this back and forth, and I'm trying to get at the point where it kind of pauses right about there. So we're at, each small number on this gauge is a 1/2 thousandth. So half, 1, 1.5, 2. So it's right in between. It's about 2, maybe 2 thousandths. Maybe a hair under 2 thousandths. So that's right in check with what we want, between 1 thousandth and 2.5 thousandths. Okay, so all of our main journal bearing clearances have checked out. Everything was between the thousandths, the 1 thousandth and the 2.5 thousandths. Generally right in like the 1.7 area, 1.8. So that looks great. So next thing that we're gonna switch to, excuse you, is we're just gonna check through the exact same process. We're gonna check our rod journals and rod journal bearing clearances. And once those are all torqued down, with the bearings in place, then we'll again check the clearances with the dial bore gauge. And as you can see, there is a little notch right here that this sits in. So you can't screw this up too bad, but we are gonna essentially have that sit just like that. So now that we have our rear main seal properly put into place, with a little bit of RTV, we're ready to grease up the bearings, grease up the crank, and we'll go ahead and set it in. Okay, so we have a bunch of engine lube ready to roll on our bearings and the crankshaft. Before doing this, just note that this is kind of one of your final chances to really clean the inside of this block. Make sure there's as little debris as possible. Okay, so now that we have the main bearing caps seated, we're gonna go ahead and start torquing them. As I torque them, 30, 70, 80, I'm gonna kind of rock the crank back and forth, tap it in a few areas just to make sure that we're not getting any binding. Okay, so I have the crankshaft torqued down, and really what you're feeling for is that this should be smooth. You want to try to get a full rotation and really feel that it's smooth and that there's no areas where it's binding. So far, so good. This feels great. I'm going to get the micrometer set up and we'll test the thrust bearing play. Okay, so this is how I have my dial indicator set up, just on 1.5 thousandth, my bad. Which should be, it's right in spec. I measured with the micrometer the diameter of the rod journals. Those turn out to be 2 inches and 95 thousandths. So what we'll do is, now that we have that, I will reference 0 off of the dial bore gauge, and then we will set our bearings in, make sure they're clean, make sure all the mating surfaces of the two ends are clean. So you're gonna have a tang on both sides of your rod, or of your rod and rod cap. You want to reference the marked sides on each side of the rod. So that's gonna be on this side. I take a plastic, like a rubber hammer here, just to get these seated. And this section here actually is where you can take off material. So like when I balance these out, the lowest assembly with piston rings, your pin, your clips, the rod, nuts, and the bearings came out to be, I think, 356 grams. And then some of them are a little heavy, so I ground off a little bit of weight on each side, making them as close as possible. The crankshaft was already internally balanced, so this should be a pretty smooth motor when we're done. So you're gonna torque these down to 33 foot-pounds, or sorry, 1.5 thousandths. I need to get better at saying saying what these clearances are. So I already did it with the rest of the rods. So clearances for the rod side journals look great. I already previously tested the side-to-side movement with the pins in. That looks great. The only thing that I'm thinking I might do before we pop these in is get a try to get an approximate height, which you go center to center. I don't know, it might help me trying to do like a measure of compression ratio and everything on this, but we'll see. So I'll go ahead and start fitting the rings after this, and just to let you know, where I actually referenced my piston width was on these dots.